Hi, homeschool friends, welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at a different kind of learning profile form that you can use to start planning and taking a look at how your child learns. In the last video, we used a form that's called the developmental profile. And in this case, we're going to look at a form called the strengths and weaknesses graph. These forms are both in the back of your Learning Plan Success Kit. You don't have to do both of them. They're just for your information. Use whichever form appeals to you or makes the most sense to you. By the way, I want to make sure that you understand that this is not a formal assessment. It certainly can't be used to diagnose your child with any kind of learning issue. However, it can provide you some good information based on your observations, which are very valid because you know and work with your child. It also might be useful if you are working with a therapist or a tutor and you want them to get a perspective on what happens when you're working with your child. And so I liken it to a lot of times if you're going to see a doctor about ADHD, they might have you fill out a Connors or a Vanderbilt assessment form or an inventory form. And all you do is check off what you know about your child. This is similar, except that it's internal. That means that it's for your use only and whoever you might want to share it with, but it cannot be used in any kind of a formal way to give you a diagnosis. So I want to change my camera here and share my screen so that we can take a look at the strengths and weaknesses graph. So before we start, I want to just get a feel for the layout of this graph and how we can use it. So this is looking at strengths and weaknesses, not at, in the other form, we looked at strengths and weaknesses and we just did a quick little check off. In this one, we're looking at some kind of a continuum from 1 to 10. So think of on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, where might your child be in each of these areas? If you already have had a diagnostic assessment for your child and the report came back and it shows percentiles or scaled scores, you can use those also because they typically fall on a scale of 10 to 100 or 100 to 1,000. Sometimes it kind of depends on what scale it is. However, this form also looks at different areas. So you can tell that they're color coded. The blue part is the developmental domains, the same ones we talked about in that developmental profile, only instead of very specific skills, we're going to go by the overall categories of the domains. Then there's English language arts, from spoken language to written language, including reading and phonics. Then we're going to look at math and the overarching categories that happen in math. And then we're going to look at content knowledge, which is social studies, science, and then some of the fine arts. You can add more categories if you want to. If any of these categories don't apply to your child, cross them off and add something else in or just skip it. Now, when I look at this, the rating scale of 1 to 10, I want to look at things that actually might be measurable so that it's not just my impressions, but I've actually got some kind of foundation for that. So I might look at grade levels. Now this doesn't go all the way to 12th grade, but if your kid's in 11th and 12th grade, most likely you're not looking at this kind of a profile anyway. You're looking at getting them ready to graduate. So you could look at grade levels and consider this first, second, third, fourth grade. You could look at percentiles, like I said earlier, or scaled scores from a diagnostic assessment, or even from if your child has been in school and taken standardized tests like the Iowa Basics, you could go off of that. Or you can just go off your own observations and your gut sense. That's not quite as reliable because even us moms have our good days and bad days. Go by your overall sense of how your child does. Not those worst days, not those best days, but the majority of the days. And then if your child does have lows and high peaks in how they do life, then mark that with a star or something so that you've got an indication that that might be something you need to watch for or work on. All right, so I'm going to use the same girl that I did in the developmental profile. I'm going to look at Maddie again. She's 9. She's going into 4th grade. And this is June 2022. Now, if I'm actually filling this out for my own planning, I would use a real date just so that maybe in 3 months or 6 months, I might do this again. This is probably going to go into that 3rd individual child tab in my record keeping. And so I might only do this once a year. I don't know. Maybe I'll do it twice a year. Honestly, I usually do it once a year. All right, so let's look at the developmental domains for Maddie. Her physical development is at about 70 percentile. I know that from her doctor appointment. Her cognitive language, that means overall, her overall language skills, like when she emerged into language, how she just communicates on a daily basis. Does she understand what I say? Does she communicate her needs? And overall, she's just slightly under normal, mostly because of her vocabulary, but she puts together good sentences. We're good with that, I think, mostly. Cognitive, numbers. She's really good with numbers. She thinks kind of in numbers, and she's always referring to the calendar and dates and things. All right, social. Maddie has a few friends. She's a friendly girl. She's kind of shy, so she's right kind of in the middle. By the way, 5, this darker line, is kind of average. It could be average for age level peers. It could be her average. I'd say in this case, it's average for her age level peers. Maddie gets along fine with other kids and adults. Emotional, I'd say that's still right on average, especially given the pandemic and how much kids are concerned about what's happening in our society lately. Maddie has a little bit of anxiety issues. I might want to bring that down a little bit if I see that persist very many more months. But for right now, a lot of kids are a little bit anxious and a little bit worried about what's happening in life around us. Her moral and spiritual life, Maddie asks a lot of questions about treating people, other people kindly, about she loves to talk about God and her faith and her prayer life, and she's a pretty amazing little girl who has a pretty deep spiritual sense and a good sense of a morality. She definitely knows right from wrong, so that's one of her strengths. All right, now I'm going to move into the English language arts. We're going to break that down a little bit more. Her spoken language is now, even though I said her language skills are a little bit low, her spoken language is actually pretty right on target. And that's kind of cool, considering that when she was really little, she was a little slow to emerge into speaking. And she's had a little bit of speech language therapy, but she was dismissed from that. So that's a good sign. However, her word skills and spelling are still low. She can learn phonics rules, but she gets them mixed up. If there's too many presented at a time, she can apply them. But again, when there's too many rules or sight words in a story, she gets confused and frustrated. So I'm going to keep that low, but it's certainly not super low. She's definitely learning. Her reading fluency is coming along nicely. I don't think she's quite at grade level, but she's pretty close. And her comprehension is absolutely strong. I would put that probably up here, maybe even higher, but for now, I'll just put it there. She answers literal comprehension questions. She can draw conclusions and have a discussion about things that aren't directly stated in a text. She loves stories and she can make up stories and find the literary elements. I'm really happy with her comprehension. Handwriting is right on target. She's got legible handwriting. It's not fancy and beautiful, but it's right average for a kid going into 4th grade. She hasn't yet started typing. That's a goal for this coming year. All right, her written expression, especially if she's telling a story, but putting together a brief paragraph has basic structure, and that's pretty good. However, she's still dictating and copying, and when left on her own, the mechanics of writing are probably her lowest skill of all, mostly because writing is the most difficult academic skill. But I think her word attack and phonics skills impact this. Her sense of capitals and punctuation rules, of getting words from her head down onto the paper is just really difficult. All right, so let's move into the math area. Counting and concepts. Actually, Maddie does okay with counting, but concepts is really a pretty big struggle for her. And I'm more concerned about the concepts, so I'm going to mark this according to that. We've been doing a lot of skip counting as we work on her multiplication facts, and a lot of drawing and manipulatives and things that will help her build concepts. They have a hard time sticking even once we've introduced them. So that part is one of our weaker areas. However, facts and processes is great. She learns very well by rote rehearsal and she drill practice, and she likes it. And she especially likes if she's worked for a week or two and achieved a little packet and gets a reward. She's motivated by finishing and accomplishing a task that's more than just a few minutes. Problem solving is somewhere in between these two. And I think problem solving is impacted a lot by her conceptualization of how we use math to problem solve. She still has a hard time distinguishing not just the symbols, but the difference in what we do with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And again, she learns more by rote. That's good. We want that. But I want to make sure that these are intact also as we go, so that when she gets to high school level math, she'll have a good foundation. Geometry is very visual, and she's a very visual, artistic girl. That's much stronger. And obviously, she's only a 4th grader. Some texts introduce what they call algebra concepts. She's not ready for algebra. And certainly the analytical sequential skills are more difficult because spelling is harder, mechanics are harder. Thus, the sequential parts of math are harder unless they're just drilled. I'm just going to cross that off. No big deal to mark that. We're not ready for it, but when she gets there, she will be. All right, social studies. The social studies, she has trouble retaining and holding on to the words or the vocabulary, and again, the sequences of time, passage, and even though she likes calendars and she likes, it may just be that she uses those as checking, because in social studies, it's hard for her to put things in their place and the relationship between things. However, she loves science and she's very good at that. So I'm going to put that up here. Music, she doesn't do music yet. She has not been introduced to an instrument. She likes to sing though, and she has good rhythm. So I'm going to put that right average, because much of it I don't really know if and when she's going to be exposed to actual doing music, but she likes music and it definitely helps her learn. She is a very visual girl. She hasn't done any performing arts, but she loves to draw, and that is probably her highest strength, is drawing and visualization. The more I use that to help her with her spelling, actually. When we practice spelling, she takes time and chatters and draws pictures for her spelling words to help with the vocabulary and retaining those words. She works really hard at it because she loves to do the drawing. And the final one is physical fitness. That kind of ties back into our developmental domains, but this time we're looking at, does she actually exercise? Is she fit? Can she move? How's her activity level? We talked about that in the developmental profile, but now we're looking at it as a subject area in school, and she's good at that. She does swimming, she does a lot of play, she rides a bike, she's active. All right, so when I look at Maddie's profile, it looks like it's scattered everywhere, but if I look a little closer, this is interesting. This is pretty close to being average, but it's one of her weaker areas. Spelling and phonics is a weaker area. Reading and fluency is a weaker area because of that. Mechanics of writing, concepts in math, particularly in knowing the operations and how to use them, and problem solving. All of these are kind of related to language skills and, more than working memory, that conceptualization of how numbers work. She's got some definite strengths though, and they all come in visual and physical areas. So the more we can do drawing or moving in her learning, the better. Absolutely. Facts and processes and comprehension. She's a smart little girl. So I've got some highs, I've got some lows. Again, just like in the developmental profile, I'm seeing kind of a profile that looks a lot like dyslexia. Although Maddie has not been formally diagnosed, she's not had any kind of an assessment. I'm just seeing that kind of profile. And as I work with Maddie, I see that in her, the way she does her learning also. So we just do a lot of the things that we would typically do for a kid with dyslexia without the diagnosis. That's all right. She's in homeschool. She's not competing with other kids, and we can just program specifically for her. Now, the last time I looked at a second kid, I looked at Robert. And I want to look at Robert again because he's got a very different profile. If just to remind you, if you watch that video, Robert is a teenager who had prenatal exposure to several different substances. He is 16 years old. He's entering 10th grade, but he is also a pretty low functioning academically. And we'll say this is June 2022. All right, so let's look. We're going to go by grade levels, mostly, but also observations, because he's been changing a lot since puberty. So I want to look at where actually are we seeing Robert doing his functioning and learning. Okay, physical development. He also just had a doctor appointment and he was at the 70th something percentile. His cognitive language, overall, his language skills are not super far below, but they certainly are not at a 16-year-old level. His number sense is the same way. And a lot of that has to do with memory. So I'm actually going to make a little note on here, memory, because we know that's what's impacting the cognitive skills. Socially, he's probably right on target. He's liked and likable. Emotionally, he's come a long way in being able to regulate his emotions. And moral spiritual is pretty well intact, although he doesn't like to be in trouble. And we usually see that come out when he feels like he's in trouble. The first thing out of his mouth is a lie. We're having a hard time dealing with that. So we're working on it. But anyway, in the moral area, we're still working. Spoken language is actually probably a bit higher than the overall cognitive language. I probably could put it the same place, but he actually is verbal, communicates well, he can communicate his feelings, and we talk about mostly age appropriate kind of topics. He wants to drive, so we talk about driving a lot. We talk about friends a lot. Word skills and spelling are still at a first grade level, almost second grade. Reading fluency is about the same place. Reading comprehension, however, is way up there. He can do pretty sophisticated character analysis with at grade level literature or from movies. Handwriting and typing is mostly illegible, and hunt and peck very hard for him to do anything with letters and words. He uses compensation strategies, by the way. So I know that that's built into his program, but where he's actually functioning is down. Written expression is a little bit higher, and the reason it is because he does use compensation strategies. He uses speech to text and text to speech, and he can organize a pretty decent paragraph with topic sentences and detailed transition phrases. He's actually pretty good at that, unless somebody's not actually helping him structure it ahead of time and just giving him a random assignment and leaving him on his own. And then we're seeing lower again. So I know that's where he's actually functioning. If I were going by assignments that we do pre-writing together, he's probably more up in an average range, or at least a little bit higher. Mechanics of writing, capitalization, punctuation are just non-existent. Counting and concepts. We're moving into the math area now. Counting and concepts. He's got an okay sense of how numbers work, but probably at about a second grade level. However, the other things in math, the facts and processes, even including fractions, problem solving, geometry, shapes, and sense of angles and triangles and circles, those are all at about a third grade, beginning fourth grade level. He's started having some algebra concepts, but he kind of understands that because of his knowledge of facts, but it's right about where the concepts are, right about at a second grade level, maybe. But keep in mind that algebra, this isn't necessarily a grade level. This is where he is in comparison to being ready to do algebra, which most kids who are 16 have either had algebra 1 and would be up here somewhere. Right, social studies and science are actually pretty average. He actually learns quite a bit, but he mostly learns from videos and discussions and not from formal learning, like reading or lectures. Music, he actually has kind of a difficult time with rhythm, and that may be going along with many of the other brain processes and integrating them. He used to sing completely monotone. That's improving, but the rhythm is still quite off. Visual and performing arts, he's actually not too bad at that. It's certainly not skilled at his age level, but it's one of his strengths. And finally, physical fitness he's right on target for his age. what gets him in participating in sports is the cognitive thinking and problem solving issues. All right, this is a very different profile compared to Maddie's. Maddie had some targeted weaknesses and some great strengths that we can utilize and work with. This is a much flatter and lower profile. And you can see, even without a formal diagnostic assessment, just going by my observations and knowing these kids and thinking about how they perform and do learning and do life, I know that we've got very different learners. They're different ages too, but very different as far as how they learn and use their brains to do life. All right. Well, I've walked you through how to use the strengths and weaknesses graph. It's a little different, a little more in depth, a little more assigning a value to things. Nothing formal. There's nothing, even if you completely mess it up, it doesn't matter because it's your impressions, your perceptions of how your unique learner works. If you do it and you're just confused and you don't know what you're looking at, always welcome to message me and I will see what I can do to help you or interpret or say, hey, that's kind of an odd profile. Maybe you want an actual formal diagnosis or an evaluation, or I might say, oh, that looks like you might be dealing with this. So anyway, I hope you know that you've got support, and I hope you know that even though this may be overwhelming, as simply as I can, I'm leading you through the steps that professionals take when they're looking at how a child learns and how other homeschool moms who have been doing it for a while may be looking at their kids in pulling together curriculum and materials when their kid is all over the place in levels. All right, well, fill out your form if you want to, use the developmental profile if you want to, but best wishes and happy homeschooling. Bye.